Does anyone right now ever recall mental health assistance to slaves? Anybody remember sending in the therapist after I sold off your son, daughter, rape?
Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. This is Millie Globe, and today I want to talk about something that a lot of people don't really think about deeply, and that's multi-generational trauma. Specifically, what Dr. Joy DeGruy talks about in her work on post-traumatic slave syndrome. A lot of times when people hear the word trauma, they think it only applies to something that personally happened to you, like a bad experience, abuse, violence, or something you directly lived through. But what Dr. DeGruy explains is that trauma doesn't always start with you. Sometimes it starts generations before you were born. So guys, watch this video until the end to get the real information, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comment section, and don't forget to subscribe. So guys, enjoy this video.
Does anyone right now ever recall mental health assistance to slaves? Anybody remember sending in the therapist after I sold off your son, daughter, raped folks? At any point? Never. Second question, after slavery was officially over, now you're free. Anybody remember any therapy then? We know it's been rough, it's been deep for you, it's been difficult. We're going to do a little group therapy. Anybody remember that? That would be no. Number three, after slavery officially ended, both in the States, in the Caribbean, the British ended, do you remember whether or not trauma continued? Did the trauma continue for people of African descent? I need to know. Okay, so now let's do the math. Hundreds of years of trauma, no treatment. Freed, more trauma, no treatment. What do you do the math? Do you think there may be residual impacts of that trauma? Of course there is. It didn't end, friends, and it hasn't ended yet. So I think on one point, African people and people of African descent are extremely resilient. Matter of fact, I think we're a miracle. Far be it for us to pathologize or to look and cast this idea of weak and sick people. Oh, on the contrary, we are profoundly resilient because we've done everything we've done thus far with no help, with not even the ability to have this discussion. As though it were possible, we escaped injury in all those hundreds of years and the years that follow. So this kind of journey I'm going to take you on is going to be one that really gives a perspective on what this trauma was, what it looks like, and clinically, what is post-traumatic stress disorder? What does it look like? Let me give you a little snapshot. We'll get into it in more depth a little later. But post-traumatic stress disorder, if in fact you are diagnosed with that, again, remember, direct or indirect trauma, here are some of the symptoms. A feeling of foreshortened future. Now, what does that mean? A feeling, well, you're not going to live long. How many of you are running into young people that don't believe they're going to make it past their 20s? Feeling of foreshortened future. Exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, difficulty falling or staying asleep, hypervigilance, right? These are symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. This is like DSM stuff, Diagnostic Statistical Manual Mental Disorders. It's in there. And there's a whole listing of all these symptoms. Now, I want to roll it back so you can understand what the transmission theory is, because I'm going to talk about transmission. So how does a person that's been traumatized by post-traumatic, literally has a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, and can we, if we are logical and we are reasonable people, assume that a fair number of Africans had to have had post-traumatic stress disorder? You think? I'm not talking about us, I'm talking about them. Untreated, though, right? Okay, so now let's do the math. Mom, who saw dad sold or sister raped, has post-traumatic stress disorder. Still mom, though, right? Only mom now has outbursts of anger, feeling of foreshortened future, difficulty falling or staying asleep, hypervigilance. That would be mom. Now, Johnny Or Mary or Shaquisha did not have the original trauma. But what are they learning? This is called social learning theory. What am I normalizing? Exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger. Are you following me? So I didn't have to be traumatized. Now, the other thing is, do you think Johnny and Mary got traumatized too? Do you see? So what happens in your environment, you learn from the significant others in your environment. And if they're broken, guess what you're going to be? You're learning from broken people. And you're normalizing that behavior. And then it becomes, years later, 2008, that's their culture. That's just the way they are. That's their culture. So there's poison in the cookies, right? But how are you going to tease out that poison? That means you have to look at the etiology of the behavior, which is what I spent many years doing. And it's not rocket science. This is not deep. Like I said, this is not required that, someone has, it's just common sense. How many of you in the room think you can cook? Come on now. I know it's a strange place. You all have the oddest food in the world. I'm trying to tell you that now. Those of you that know how to cook, who taught you how to cook? Mom, dad, family. Who you think taught them? Hello, social learning theory. You learn from those in your environment. And if they couldn't cook, the likelihood is you can't either. Okay. So there's things that we don't question them. This is what goes in the curry. What are you talking about? This is how you make curry. Well, how you know? Because that's the way my mother made it. Well, maybe, she didn't get the recipe right. In fact, the reason why there was more importation of slaves to these plantations is because they died so frequently. They were treated so badly, ate so poorly, that females never reached their menstrual cycles. They never actually started their menstrual cycles, so they couldn't reproduce, you see. And so many of them died, they had to import more. That's how treacherous was, you lazy black folks that you are. Isn't that ironic, though? What's so ironic is black people run from the shame of feeling like they're perceived as lazy. I live with that so much that when I would go to hotels, I would leave it cleaner. Because everybody's mother taught you, leave it cleaner than you found it. So black folks are so hypersensitive, I was cleaning up the hotel room because I wouldn't want anyone to think I'm dirty, right? Now, other people in the audience that are of color, how much harder did your parents tell you you had to work to get to even? How much harder? You had to work twice as hard. Now, how come I knew that about you? How come I knew that? Think about it. And yet at the same time, white people think we're lazy, you see? But we're so hypersensitive because of the shame, right? And then our ancestors will work to death. To death. Recently, they unearthed a slave cemetery. They unearthed actually a slave cemetery in New York City. It's on Wall Street, by the way. They had it blocked off so you couldn't get to it. But because they didn't want to deal with it. You can't just bulldoze a cemetery. So here in all these skyscrapers in the middle of it is this little cemetery. And there's slaves in that cemetery. More important than that was what the bones told us. Because, now, you got CSI. Hell, I can go in there and tell you what's going on now. So with the CSI thing, now they've discovered a little bit about the bones. And to me, the most phenomenal thing about the bones is what they told us about those people and how they live. Majority of the people in there were children, infants and children, high mortality, infant mortality rate. They even know what they died of. Died of malnutrition and starvation because they could tell by the rotting of the teeth and the jawline. So even though they most likely grew food, they weren't allowed to eat it. And then they found something even more peculiar that speaks to this idea of why he believed we required less sleep. They would show a large frame man, and they would find an injury where the muscle actually detached itself from the bone as a result of exertion and not injury. Stay with me. It detaches itself from the bone as a result of exertion. That means you work so hard, the muscle detached itself from the bone. You don't see those kind of injuries in contemporary society because no one's going to work that hard. Unless, of course, you have a gun trained on you from sunrise to sunset. So we do have empirical evidence of how hard folks worked. Then he went on to say that we were dumb, cowardly, and incapable of feeling grief. Why would Thomas Jefferson need to believe that? Why would he need to believe we didn't feel grief? What was he doing, do you think, that produced cognitive dissonance? You were killing people. Not only were you killing people, beating them, you were selling them, yes? Selling mothers away from their children and husbands away from wives. And surely they don't feel it, because if they felt it, that would make them human like me. So I simply say, and you see, it's not even so much that he said it, but he was an important person. If Joe, nobody said it, but he said it. So what do you think the rest of the folks, uneducated laborers, believed? Well, they don't feel grief, you know. After all, Thomas Jefferson says they don't. So he becomes a critical person in making those statements. But you see, it was all to relieve and to settle the conscience that he died with.
So I wanted to discuss a concept that I read about in a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Now, once again, keep in mind that the purpose of my videos is to educate my community, because I believe that the more you know, the better prepared you are to deal with America, especially if you're Black in America. Now, we know that the practice of white supremacy is good for white people because it benefits their pockets and also their co-conspirators, coons included. But what I like about what the author of this book did is that she broke down what goes on in the mind of a person complying with behaviors that are inconsistent with their morals. I have a question. How do you come to the conclusion and rationally believe that someone with the same biological makeup as yourself is somehow inferior to you? Well, the term the author uses is called cognitive dissonance. And this is how the author describes it. She says, when we commit a negative act or think about doing so, most of us get uncomfortable. This discomfort is caused by the difference between the action and what we believe about ourselves, because most people tend to believe that they are decent people, even enslavers, which is hard to believe. That difference is called cognitive dissonance. And because humans tend to not be content with this level of discomfort, doing things that they believe are wrong, they try to resolve the feeling. And there are two ways to mentally self-correct or make it so that you can live with what it is that you've done or continue to do. The first is to own up to the negative act, or the second is to justify the negative act and not admit any wrongdoing. And in doing so, the perpetrator will often go as far as dehumanizing or demonizing the victim. That sounds pretty familiar, right? America has long associated Blackness with criminality and inferiority. Not because we are more criminal or inept in our intellectual abilities. There's never been any kind of credible evidence that supports that. But if they can criminalize you, they can justify their treatment of you and ultimately profit off of your plight. And America has a long track record of this also. Hobbyists, for instance, with no formal schooling, were given credibility in the pseudo science field of eugenics, which I'll touch on in another video. And a more recent example is today, when a Black man is killed by the police, it's common for the media to release his criminal record if he has one. If it's a kid, they'll release his father's criminal record if the father has one. And yes, that has happened. These are all examples of dehumanizing or demonizing the victim. And in a roundabout way, it is an admission of guilt that they themselves may not even be cognizant of. This is what I would consider cognitive dissonance. Thanks for watching. Comments and likes are welcome, whether negative or positive. And also, I sell shirts. If you're interested, you can check them out. Website is in the description. Thank you.
So Dr. Joy talks about how slavery wasn't just a physical system, it was a psychological one. Enslaved people were exposed to constant violence, fear, humiliation, family separation, and dehumanization for hundreds of years. And when slavery officially ended, there was this idea that people were suddenly free and everything was supposed to be fine after that. But what didn't happen was healing. There was no mental health support. There was no counseling. There was no process to help formerly enslaved people recover from what they had been through. They were released from slavery and immediately thrown into a society that was still hostile, racist, and violent towards them. So the trauma didn't stop. it just changed its forms. So Dr. Joy explains that when trauma goes untreated, it doesn't disappear. Instead, it gets passed down through behaviors, survival strategies, beliefs, and coping mechanism. Parents who are traumatized raised children while still in survival mode. Those children grew up and raised their own children under similar stress and fear. Over time, this behavior starts to feel normal. Things like hypervigilance, mistrust, emotional numbness, anger, or even self destructive behavior didn't come out of nowhere. According to Dr. Joy, these are adaptive responses to generation of trauma. One thing she really emphasizes on is that enslaved people were punished for being human, showing emotions, resisting, protecting family, or even learning to read could lead to severe punishment or death. So like suppressing emotions, avoiding vulnerability, or using aggression as protection were necessary back then. And the problem is that those same survival behavior don't always serve people well in modern society. But because the trauma was never addressed, those behavior continue to be passed down. Another important point Dr. Joy make is that after slavery, black communities were given resources to recover. Weren't. They were not given resources to recover. There was no land distribution, no financial support, no access to education or healthcare on a large scale. Instead, there were black codes, Jim Crow laws, lynching, segregation, and systematic discrimination. Until now, like it goes on until now. So the trauma didn't end, it was reinforced. Imagine surviving generations of violence and instability and then being blamed for the effects of that trauma. Instead of anyone asking how you got there in the first place, that's something Dr. Joy talks about a lot. How society often focuses on symptoms without acknowledging the cause. She also talks about how trauma can affect identity. When people are constantly told they are inferior, dangerous, or less than human, that messaging doesn't just disappear over time. It can shape how people see themselves and each other. This is why Dr. Joy says that healing has to start with awareness. You can't fix what you don't understand. Recognizing multigenerational trauma isn't about making excuses or avoiding responsibility. It's about understanding context. It's about realizing that some behavior didn't come from nowhere. They came from history of survival under extreme conditions. And what's powerful about Dr. Joy's work is that she doesn't just talk about trauma, she talks about healing. She emphasizes education, self-awareness, community support, and breaking cycles by consciously choosing different ways to respond. Healing doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. It means acknowledging it, learning from it, and deciding not to pass the pain forward. So when we talk about multi-generational trauma and post-traumatic slave syndrome, we're not stuck in the past. We are actually trying to move forward in a healthier way. Because when trauma is named, it can be addressed, and when it's addressed, real healing becomes possible. But so for the real healing to become possible also, not just for the black people have to acknowledge their past, like their history, the white people too have to accept it and have to say this happened and it was wrong. But even if they don't do that, I believe that we as black people and black Americans can heal. We can just heal. But also what I hate so much is when people say that we should just move on, like just move on. It happened a long time ago, but it doesn't work like that. Trauma is real, and it's so terrible what happened to our ancestors and to black Americans and the history of America, because those people like didn't get any support system. Imagine like right now, the world has evolved so much. I mean, if a child is going through something, you immediately put him into childcare or into therapy. And right now, if something can happen like that, I mean, social services or even they can make arrest. But it was not like that in the past, and it's so sad seeing that it happens and it continues to happen even now. So guys, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, don't forget to comment, don't forget to subscribe, and I hope to see you in my next video.